Hello and welcome to the Brass Junkies. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my euphonium and slush pump operating colleague, Lance LaDuke. Lance, how are you today?
I'm feeling very masculine. I defended the honor of my wife from a rabid squirrel this morning.
See, I like how now that we're on air, now you're positive it's rabid. You've apparently gotten more data in the last 10 minutes while you've just been
and it was a flying
basement.
squirrel too. It was
Did it have the goggles like they do in the cartoons?
It did, like
Yep.
Rocky. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I do like I at our prescribed time, I get in front of the computer and it says Lance is in the meeting, so I'm like, great. So I then get on, and then it's just a microphone, and there's nothing else. And then it's only like 2 minutes late. He said, "Sorry, I
put this up there.
Sorry, I had a squirrel incident." I was like, "What the hell is a squirrel incident?" And then and then he.
Well, we have a
explained.
dachshund, and the dachshund and the squirrel were of comparable weight and size, and so my lovely wife was concerned that there was going to be an altercation. So
That's pretty funny.
yeah,
Yep, I like the fact that she thought that you were going to be able to help too.
yeah.
That's
She doesn't mind sacrificing me, I think, because she thought this could be a death situation, and it was the dachshund or me, and it was not an easy.
Yeah, but if you think this through, if the squirrel is actually capable of taking you out, then the dog and
She's
her are
next,
next.
right?
I mean, yeah, it's not like that's going to it'd be quite a coincidence if that was what tapped the squirrel's energy was killing the full-size human once. It's like he's probably just going to keep going. That's a serial killer squirrel at that point. So
Well, now she's worried because there may or may not be a squirrel nest somewhere up near the house. That this is why the squirrel was like. So now I have a feeling that I'm going to be spending some time outdoors today.
Oh, so you're actually happy to be talking to me? That's once in a row.
This is a good one. Yeah, we can take as long as you want.
So
Squirrel Hunter.
This is the second part to a listener's choice episode that we started way back in episode 97. If you haven't checked that out, then please do. But this is all about starting a chamber group. And that was recorded early in the morning after I stayed up until 4 in the morning watching the Red Sox lose in Game 4 of the World Series. And actually, it all ended up working out okay. That was of course, we recorded an episode the morning after the 16-inning game, 17-inning game, 18, I think, inning game. It was the only game the Red Sox lost in the entire World Series. But yeah, I was a little crusty. So, but the episode you carried us really. It was a heroic, almost like squirrel defending effort by you.
Maybe that's why I don't remember it. It just seemed like any old regular episode to me.
It was a while ago. That was 2 Boston championships ago. So now that everyone has clicked off the episode.
Oh, that's when we recorded it because it aired in late October of last year.
That is 2 championships ago, believe it or not. So yes, the Red Sox won 1 2 days later, and then the Patriots won 1 2 months after that. So,
I thought you meant Red Sox.
No, that would be impressive if they could win 2 titles in 4 months. But I digress. Let's get right to it here. At the very end, we'd planned on that being this was an email from Becky from Omaha. Thank you.
Oh,
again.
yeah, that's right.
Yep, for sending that in, Becky. But we started in, and we realized we were like almost an hour in, and that we still had a whole bunch of stuff to go, and so we on the spot said let's do a part 2, and so here we are. So we're going to jump into a number of things. We're going to talk about how to run a rehearsal, about collaborating with other groups, being producers rather than just consumers of music, finding gigs, our thoughts on management, what to do at the gigs, follow-ups, social media, website, a bunch of stuff. So let's dig right in. Lance, do you want to talk a little bit about how to run a rehearsal?
Yeah, it seems like, well, I coach a bunch of groups at Carnegie Mellon and have done over the years, and I think that most groups think you just get in there and you start at the beginning and you slug your way to the end, and then what do you want to do now? Seems like we're slowing down a little bit there. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure about all that. So
don't forget the let's run it again, guy.
Yeah, there's that one. Yeah. Well, let's just do it again. Yeah. And then, all right, when are we meeting again? So my suggestion is that you should have an objective to every, just like you would for a regular practice session, you should have an objective for the rehearsal. And it could be that the objective is just to read a whole bunch of new charts, and that's fine. And you just set them up and knock them down. But if you're preparing for a show, you've picked a program, then you need to have targeted rehearsals. And this, I'm getting angry old man more and more every day, but the assumption is that if you're in that mode, if you're in really digging in and prepping a piece, then it has to be the case that everybody in the room knows their own part inside and out.
There's a difference between practicing and rehearsing.
Yeah, exactly.
Practicing is what you do in your basement in a practice room by yourself. That is your homework. And then, yes, and rehearsing is when you are actually combining those things and trying to make the art better or more interesting or more something, but not trying to actually piece together the art.
Right.
Yes.
And if you don't have a basement to practice in, you should break into someone's house who has a basement and practice down there. And they ask what's going on or call the cops. You just explain that you have a very important performance coming up. That should take care of it.
If you break in, you really have to have a plan because you have to practice whatever the most pressing thing is right at the top.
You better go first.
In case all you get is the top.
That is kind of the worst burglar, is a brass playing burglar.
It's a guy
trying to get your
There's a tuba player playing long tones in my basement. And it's out of tune.
The furnace is acting up again. I think there's a killer squirrel down there.
Every time he plays forte, he sounds angry. Yeah, there you go.
So you need to, and actually there's another kind of, so there's reading rehearsals. There's rehearsals where you're digging in to really kind of uncover how your group wants to play this piece. There's performance rehearsals where it's largely about, we need to get a sense of delivering this art in a cogent way, in a way that says what you want to say as a group. And then not that there aren't more, but you should have some just sort of skills rehearsals where it's about communication. It's about how are we going to start tunes? What's the best position for us to be seated or standing in? How might we, let's work on accelerados and rallentandos. Let's work on intonation. Let's play long tones. Let's do chords. So if it's a gigging group and you've got the gig on Thursday and you just need to read the tunes down and make sure everybody knows the roadmap and the key changes, okay, fine. But if you really want to make a go of it, then you need to uncover every rock. You need to look at every aspect of what you're doing. Yes. And frankly, you should have in Boston Brass, we would regularly, okay, the bow will be here. Let's practice the bow. How are we going to walk on? Let's practice walking on. How are we going to walk off? Who's going to acknowledge what? Who's going to call the solo on that piece? So all those sort of logistic concerns as well.
Any group that looks polished has done that work. I don't care how many gigs a year you do. Now, if you play 100 gigs a year and you don't do the work, you're not going to look as unpolished as a group that plays 2 gigs a year, but you're still not going to look polished. So, yeah.
And the beautiful thing is you don't need a 2-hour rehearsal to work on bows and walking on and off.
Sure as hell don't.
It'll only take you 15 minutes, maybe max, to do all of those things and talk through the show. Okay, after this one, we're not going to talk. After that one, you're going to talk. After this one, we're going to do a full bow. After that one, you're going to take a solo bow, and then we're going to keep going. But it's the analogy I've used most often for this is that a chef spends all day with their crew preparing a meal. And if they just sort of throw it on the plate, without any attention to what plate they use, what it looks like, the arrangement on the plate, it negatively impacts the experience for the diner. So they don't spend all day worrying about what's the right size and shape plate for this thing, but they do spend some time thinking about it. So it's as far as I'm concerned, how you deliver the art. But in the Air Force Band, they used to beat this into our heads, which was people listen with their eyes. And so it is a component of what you're doing, and you should spend some time doing it.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to share just one really great rehearsal technique that we used a lot in Boston Brass. which is all that matters in terms of balance, in terms of matching articulations, in terms of all that stuff, is what it sounds like in the audience. It does not matter what it sounds like on your side of the trombone or your side of the trumpet or your side of the violin. All that matters is what it sounds like in the audience. As I always say, that's what paid the mortgage. It's not what it sounds like on my side of the tuba. So in that vein, if there was something that the low brass trio, which the horn can be a part of the high brass trio or the low brass trio, depending on the player, depending on the writing, but if there's something that's horn, trombone, and tuba, and the trumpets, not that they have to not be playing, but they're playing something different, then taking one of the trumpets and sending them either to as far away in the rehearsal room as possible, or if you're in a hall, send them out to the 20th row and have them listen from out there to the balance, to the releases, to all of those things. I was shocked when I first joined Boston Brass at how much left edge of the notes I had to put on, like how much attack I had to put on at times to match the trombone. And the horn can be not a very articulate instrument, and J.D. Shaw can play that way intentionally. He can also put an amazing front to the note, as a horn player. And when those two guys, when it was like a jazz tune where I went from walking bass lines to momentarily a couple of hits and then right back to walking a bass line, those hits, you don't need to have two really clear attacks and then one from the tuba. That's not good. And so the most important thing in a band, musically, financially, spiritually, all of it, is trust, right? You have to trust that when the trumpet player who got sent out says, I need more left edge, and it sounds like ridiculous, it sounds affected on my side of the bell, and I'm like, okay. And Rich Kelly kept saying more left edge, more left edge. I believed him, and I was like, that sounds good. I'd listen to a recording. It's like, that's what I thought I sounded like before I tripled the attack on that note. So, but sending someone out into the hall to listen from out there is a really, really powerful, because that's actually measuring what ultimately needs to be measured, because nobody gives a crap what it sounds like on stage, and nobody's going to be sitting 5 feet in front of your band either. So that's, yeah. And if you're in a small space, that's fine. But try to get some distance.
I thought I was being punked, because that was a regular thing that was happening. Because when I joined the band, I brought the euphonium as well. So then that added a level. The other four of you had to help me dial in the left edge with an instrument that the group wasn't used to playing with.
Right.
And
yep.
So I just thought, well, this is just the beginner hazing rookie thing. And then I'd hear it on a recording, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yep. There you go.
Some of my other favorite techniques are, Sam actually did some cool stuff with us at what conference was that?
That was at the iTech in Tucson, Arizona in 2010.
Well, two that that stick out are related. One is to have a group try and start a piece, especially if it's a slow, pretty thing, with your eyes closed.
Yes.
And so you're sitting in your normal position, and you just have to become aware of what the other folks around you are doing. Which is, it's funny. It usually takes, 3 or 4 tries until you can really start to dial it in. But once you can start to dial it in, it's this kind of superhero thing. You really are becoming aware. We're primarily going on site. A lot of times in the quintet, you see someone breathe to play, and then you kind of anticipate that, and you use auditory information as sort of a backup plan there. But it really forces you to turn your ears on to be aware of when the chord's going to start. The other thing that Sam had us do, and that I've done a number of times as well, is we'll have us go to far corners of the room, get as far away from each other as you can in the room, and then try and play together. Because it really, and actually at one point he had us not only go as far away in the room as possible, but to turn around, so that now you're really having to dial in these secondary senses as much as possible. And so you make it as hard as you can, so that when you come back together, the standing or sitting next to one another is just sort of like a walk in the park, because you've really forced yourself to be aware of what's going on in the rest of the group.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Empire Brass made me jump through a lot of those hoops when I was a wee lad. Yeah, back at Tanglewood, and yeah, it was always really, really, really good. Yeah, the eyes closed thing, man. You get dialed in when you take away like one of your main sense. Then the rest of them definitely get heightened. Which, depending on the group, the smell thing, that's not necessarily a good thing. But
not so good.
Yeah, not so good.
Late in tour versus early in tour. Well, and the other thing is you should record everything. You should record all of your rehearsals. If you have a smartphone, you have the ability to record.
Yes.
And it doesn't need to be ideal. And if you're a young group, it's fantastic if you just divide up the pieces. So if it's a quintet and there's 5 pieces you're working on, each person is in charge of going in and listening to one of those pieces and being the usher, the leader, the mentor of that piece. And they study the score and they come back with some suggestions about, well, here's what went well, here's what didn't go well, here's where I think we should start.
Yes. Yeah, and resist the temptation. The first time that you listen to a recording of your group, you are going to very much primarily listen to yourself. And the second time that you listen, you are very much primarily going to listen to yourself. And it can be a really great exercise, actually, to just listen to the second trumpet all the way through, like from the very beginning all the way to the end, and then listen to just the horn from the very beginning all the way to the end. And then you just start to notice things, both for comments for others, but then also you just get to really know the piece better and can see how every once in a while, when there's really great writing, every once in a while there might be like a little bit of a handoff between lines that's actually subtle. It's not like an obvious one where it's like an 8-bar phrase where I play the first 4 and then hand off to Lance who plays the second 4. But it's just like there's just a little bit of harmony, and then somebody jumps from one line to another and then effortlessly back. And if it's written well, you sometimes don't even notice in a good way. But then when you notice that, you can really dial in and you can just make it go from good to special. So,
there's another aspect of this that I guess I don't know what other category I'd put it in besides a rehearsal strategy, which is the pacing of the show. And it is a part of when do we talk and when do we bow, but it's also where's everybody's face at different parts in the show, particularly for the smaller mouthpiece folks. That's a real honest to God concern. Mm-hmm. And where is the audience emotionally at any given point, and I guess more of a programming thing, but let's stay on the physical side. It is an honest to goodness issue for any of us to get to the other end of a 2-hour performance. If you're not used to doing that, is a thing.
Yep.
And so you can really screw your colleagues and insist that a thing be a way because you want it to be that way, or you can be sensitive to the notion, well, that this is a real thing. And so I can do my colleague a solid by offering to go and talk on the mic, or we can stick a vocal tune in here, or we can put a low brass feature in here, or we can, we developed, not that we were the first people to do this, but we developed a whole bunch of strategies, and we had freaking strong, the 3 that weren't us were incredibly physically strong players and could, really
we're spiritual
do anything.
Rocks, though.
Yeah, well, there's that. But nonetheless, it's just a fact of the matter. It's not supposed to feel good. You're pressing a piece of metal to your face for 2 hours.
That is a Mark Gould quote that was just cleaned up. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
a bunch.
we looked at, is there a creative way for us to solve this? Where's the audience at this point? Oh, okay. Well, they could we just did this really heavy, serious thing. Let's do something light. And so in our instance, with the personalities that we had, well, maybe there will be a comedy song, or maybe there will be a longer talk that sets up the CD sales at there's a win-win where, okay, someone's going to talk about, we have this new CD and it's available in the wherever, and we'll be out there to sign autographs and do the whatever. So there's or I'm going to introduce all of the players, or I'm going to tell. And a lot of times you need to have a bunch of those stories in your back pocket because stuff goes wrong as well. And so you need to be able to either just walk up to the microphone and start talking and know that you can do that, or you need to have back pocket of talks, and they can be on point, or they can just be sort of funny anecdotes when somebody's valve goes wonk, or if you're reading off iPads and someone's iPad dies until they get it rebooted, or if there's how many ways can it go wrong? Of all of them. Like if there's a way it can go wrong, it will at some point or another if you end up fortunate enough to get to travel the planet playing your horn.
Yes.
So you just need to be ready for anything. And you need to have at least one person in the band that can go and talk indefinitely. And we had, pretty much any of us could go up. That was a really good feeling, knowing that it didn't really matter what went down. Somebody can go get on the mic and make it make sense.
And there's my dog.
Your dog hates what I just said.
Well, ironically, the dog also did this during part 1. She doesn't do this that often, but she's barking like somebody just knocked on the door, which means that she's going to go ballistic for another minute and a half, 2.5, 6 minutes. If maybe it was a squirrel, actually. She doesn't like those either.
You know what that reminds me of?
What does that remind you of?
It reminds me of the very nice people at the Mary Pappard School of Music at Duquesne University.
Why, because they're dogs?
I don't know. I just was looking for a segue. Oh, and Bubble Butt's mad. He feels like I shouldn't say mad. And now I'm going to get a text right when he's heard that. Then he's going to send me a text. But he feels like we've beaten a dead horse. And I would argue with him if I disagreed.
That's our brand, man.
I know.
To quote Carol Yaunch from way back in like episode 10 or something, man, you guys sure can drive a joke into the ground. It's like Carol, you've met us. Like, yes, what were you expecting? Nuance? Like, yeah, exactly.
So if you're interested in finding out about what's going on at Duquesne University and the Mary Pappard School of Music, you can click on the link in the show notes below, and in the link there's a page that's been designed just for the fans of the Brass Junkies, and you can find out about the ensembles, the fantastic faculty members who are teaching there, and the opportunities to study at the Mary Pappard School of Music. So very, very special thanks to Jim Leadfoot Nova for making that possible.
I muted myself during that. The dog is still going ballistic upstairs. So, yeah, that's great.
He's like a serious car guy,
Jim
Nova.
I did know that.
I just recently, we should have him back on because he's gotten in some trouble over the years for the Leadfoot thing, and we should have him on to talk about it because it's got a bunch of stories I didn't know. So that's a future tease.
There you go. All right, let's get to the next thing here, which is being producers versus consumers of music. And this goes along the lines of programming. And Lance in a second is going to talk about collaborations. And he was a real champion of some very cool collaborations, which were incredible musically and artistically, but also from a business standpoint. Jeff Connor, little-known trumpet player in the Boston area, used to talk about this all the time in Boston Brass master classes, where it was very important to be producers of chamber music rather than just consumers of chamber music. And what he meant by that was that Boston Brass, and by no means did Boston Brass reinvent the wheel. I mean, hell, we had 2 trumpets, a French horn, a trombone, and a tuba. It's like, whoa, where'd you guys come up with that idea? It's like, well, yeah, it had been around at that point for 50 years already, which compared to the string quartet, not very long. But yeah, we were the 9,000th group to get that instrumentation. And then we did add a euphonium, which was radical, and that'll tell you something about classical music. But anyway, it is very important. It is so much easier to be first at something than it is to be just better than everybody else. There is a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. In the very beginning of this book, it talks about how everyone knows who the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean was, and that was, of course, the great trombone player Christian Lindbergh. No, it was not. It was the pilot, Charles Lindbergh, who was not a very nice human, but he's famous. He's got an airport. He's in the Smithsonian because he did it. From what I understand, it was like a SpaceX kind of a thing, so there were a bunch of people trying, and he was the first person to do it. The second guy nobody knows knows about. Even though he was better by every metric, it was like right afterwards. It was something like 2 weeks later. There's going to be an aviation expert who's going to be correcting me because I'm like close but not exact. But I know he flew faster and he used less fuel. Both of those things. So by like a pilot's metrics, he was better. His name was Hinkle or Hinky or Hanky or something like that. Nobody cares about that poor guy because he was second. Here's the thing. Everyone knows who was third, and the third person to do it was Amelia Earhart, and they don't know her because she was third. Nobody cares about third. She was first in her own category. She was the first woman to fly solo, and especially back then, when it wasn't a theory, we were all of us dudes were positive that women couldn't do anything of any value. So it was like, wait, what? So, but she was the first woman, so she created her own category. So here's the thing: is that when you produce your own music, and we're about to hear about some collaborations that we did with Boston Brass, when we collaborated with Amani Winds, we were not trying to compete with the Empire Brass collaborations with Woodwind Quintet. We were not trying to compete with the Canadian Brass collaborations with Woodwind Quintet. To my knowledge, I don't think either of those groups has ever done that, which is just because you can't do everything. But the point is that we completely did our own thing there. And guess what? It got a bunch of traction, and we've left some really great music and some great charts in our wake for other people to perform as well. So, Lance, you're the guy that really got those things going. So why don't you talk about that and the Tank Quartet a little bit?
Well, I thank you for giving me credit there, but I don't think. I mean, there was a long history of Boston Brass collaborating before I got to the group, and
I guess
there was an
you
album.
pushed it though. And
I did.
Yes, and you didn't. To be clear, there was a lot of we had played with the Philly Singers, but that was more on their concert series, and so we were just kind of like the added brass that did our own couple of pieces. And there was an entire organ album, but that one was cool, and they commissioned a piece, so there was some producing of chamber music there as well. But there are some famous Empire Brass had an organ album. I think that you kind of came a little bit more out of left field, which go figure, right? The Squirrel Defender, came more out of left field with it. So I think you just kind of took the idea and ran with it further.
Maybe because when I got in, the Kenton Christmas Carol show was kind of just ramping up. The album had just come out. The organ record was there. We'd done a lot. We would do a pretty healthy number of performances as guests, either in front of a band or in front of an orchestra. And then just this notion that, well, two things happened. There was this phenomenon where we were working in, sometimes it was just the quintet, but then there was these other types of shows, which opens the world in lots of cool and wonderful ways. And then we became friends because we were on the same management company with the Amani Winds. And so we ran into them a number of times. And then actually, I believe Jeff was the one who put together the collaboration with the Amani Winds, where we did the first half was the Miles Davis and Gil Evans version of Sketches of Spain. And the second half was with Porgy and Bess. And so it was the 10 of us plus drummer Dan Hostetler came and played with us. And we had arrangers from within the groups. So Sketches of Spain was handled by the Amani Winds, and the Porgy and Bess was handled by Boston Brass in terms of creating the charts. And so then some of it came out of that kind of happy accident where we had friends in the industry, and the Tang did as well. And part of it was because our management, like a string quartet they'll have, here's our potential programs for the season, and it could be 3, 4, 5 programs. And largely because we memorized our shows, it was difficult for us to come up to have, basically our show was our show, and it might last for a season or two or a season and a half. And we would start, filtering in new tunes, but largely because of the nature of the memorization and the choreography, or at least that was the excuse we were telling ourselves.
But there is another reason, though, which is that that when you are featuring a program of late Beethoven string quartets, that Beethoven string quartets will sell tickets as well. Right. Just because, wow, I've never heard of this group, but they look good, and I am a huge fan of Beethoven's late string quartets, so I'm going to go. Brass music does not have that tradition, right. And the brass music that you are playing, the Ewalds, I think are really phenomenal music. The Ewalds are not going to sell tickets to people who like go to support classical music because it's a good thing to do. And so people that go to brass concerts are generally going to see the brass, whereas, and not that people don't go to see the strings, but it's like there's also a selling point there. So it's not a criticism. Yeah. It's actually, I'm jealous that they've got that.
They're coming to hear the repertoire. Yes. They might not have ever heard the group, but they'll go anyway because they dig the repertoire.
Correct. And they also give them the benefit of the doubt. It's like, well, if they're on this series, then they must be great. And so I want to hear them play one of my favorite Haydn quartets.
I guess I would say that cut our way as well because I just like brass, so I never heard of this group, so I'm just going to go hear brass.
Yep, for sure, and they also don't necessarily care. Yeah, I don't think that too many consumers would say, "I'm going to pay money to go see a brass quintet." Wait, let me find out what they're playing first. Because if you are completely late Beethoven quartetted out, which I could never get in a million years of listening to them nonstop, but then, it's like, I do not like Haydn. I'm not going to see that program. I'll catch them next time. So, when they're doing something a little edgier. So
our management came to us and asked, were there other offerings that we could have? And their example was the Kenton Christmas carols was an example of a thing where they could go to a presenter and say, well, we had sort of normal brass last year. Is there something else? And so the other thing is historically, like when Empire was touring, it was not uncommon for really big concert programs to put brass quintets on the show. And Riverdance, not solely, but, after Riverdance, that really changed. And this notion of this huge spectacle, that's what was going into those 1,500, 2,000 seat halls.
Yep.
And so the notion of 5 people in a semicircle or an arc standing and playing for 2 hours was a thing that it was a moment in time that had passed.
Right.
And so how can you have a thing that is bigger, that looks bigger on stage, that has a bigger thematic concept or idea behind it? And so the collaboration with the Amani Winds was a beautiful step in that direction. And then we decided to push it even further. And so we had become buddies with, you knew the Tang from where? Boston?
Way back, Tanglewood. They were on the faculty. This is a string quartet from Singapore that have been artists in residence at Young Soo To Conservatory for a couple of decades now. And they, I knew them from like the early 2000s when all 4 of them. This was right as they started to have families, but there was like 3 summers in a row when they were on the faculty at BUTI and were there for 8 weeks. And so I ended up hanging out with those guys 20, 30, 40 times a summer. We just spent just hundreds of hours together each summer. And so to be able to get to go over there and collaborate with them was just, it was amazing. Seeing them was always the highlight of my trips to Singapore, which is my favorite country in the world to visit because of the food. But then to get to collaborate with them was just amazing.
Well, and we were there. We were going at least every other year for a while there.
We were.
I mean, maybe they still are. I don't know.
I went. They have been since we've left. I think maybe twice. But I went 7 times in my 14 years, and I don't think the first one happened until 2003. So I went 7 times in 11 years. Yep.
Well, and we were always, at the bar afterwards talking with the Tang, boy, it'd be cool if we could do something together, and how would that work? And, it's just like, that's an impossibility. And then until it wasn't. And so we I started thinking about, how might we do that? And Matt Trotman, actually, who was a guest on our show, I don't remember what episode now, he'd come out with an album where he did reductions of West Side Story and the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet. And I just stole the idea and thought, well, this is a cool, Notes from the Balcony idea. That became the name of the show, where it's all music related to the story of Romeo and Juliet. So for months, I like completely filled my phone with every composer who had ever done anything with Romeo and Juliet. I poured through all of that stuff, trying to figure out, well, what would be what would be easily adaptable, wouldn't sound ridiculous, and would be a nice combination of forces for us to do. And I knew that West Side Story was a must, and I thought that the Prokofiev was likely. But then, it was, months of listening to stuff. And where we ended up was we did 3 quintet arrangements that I did of, who the frick was it?
The Kabalevsky?
The Kabalevsky, yeah. These 3 Kabalevsky movements from a larger suite with just the quintet. So the idea was the first half will be the more classical set, and the second half will be the more poppy set. And so we started things off with brass quintet, doing these 3 Kabalevsky pieces with just the 5 of us, and then the rest of the group, the rest of the performers, which for the Prokofiev involved the Tang Quartet, piano, and percussion. And those arrangements were all done by JD. JD was out of the group, but he agreed to do the charts for us.
Incredible charts. Good Lord.
And then in the second half, we did 3 of the Juliet letters. That was the collaboration between Elvis Costello and I'm blanking now, Brodsky String Quartet.
Yes, Brodsky. Yep.
And so they came out, and did I sing in Singapore?
You sure did.
I did. Okay, so I sang
Jeff.
those. There was an instrumental one and a couple vocal ones, and I did the vocal ones. And then the rest of the second half was West Side Story with, I don't think we had piano on that. I think it was just percussion. And Joe Spagnola was a guy that I knew from Michigan State 8 million years ago.
Again, incredible chart.
Really beautiful, beautiful charts. And that performance of that was one of my favorite gigs ever. I mean, it was just, we were in the Esplanade. The Tang doesn't do anything halfway. So they had like stage managers and crew, and like they had this really elaborate kind of beautiful set that we sat on, and the lighting was
the nicest and biggest concert hall in the country. And it was amazing. There was over 1,000 people there. It was
really special.
Yeah, that was my second favorite Boston brass gig ever. First was the national anthem at Fenway Park before a Pedro Martinez start in 2001.
Oh, I thought you said the one after I left.
Well, that was
third.
Here in Domingo, I was like, that's how the trombone sounds. There you go.
Fair.
Wow,
that's fair.
You're good.
I'd argue. It's a good point. So then,
wait, and you have a good attitude. This is like, is this heaven? No, there's trombones here. This can't be heaven. But still, it's like, you sound great.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we were able to do it. Did we just do it once over here? There was another quartet that was on our management, and I'm blanking on their name too. I can't remember anything anymore.
Yeah, geez. We did it with them in multiple places.
Kalamazoo, and
there we also did it in Kentucky.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
There was a second. Yep. It starts with an A.
Oh yeah. Anyway, those 4.
Yeah, those 4.
I know there were 4 of them.
It was 2 violins, viola, and cello.
Right.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway.
But it was just incredibly rewarding and fun, and and actually it was a big risk as well, because it was a big financial risk, and it was an artistic risk, because we weren't 100% sure how it was going to work, and it cost not an insignificant amount of money. It was actually, the decision was, do we come out with another album, or do we come up with these arrangements for this show? And I would not say that it was a unanimous vote, but we did end up going in the direction of the production of this show. And you could argue, it was a good argument on the other hand, that, coming out with an album was better use of resources. And, it's we went in the direction that we went. So
Enzo Quartet.
Enzo, that's right.
Like I said, starts with an A. If you pronounce it like an E. Yep. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
It was just so fun, and it also pushed us in lots of ways. Like how do you the Amani win? That's one of the other big advantages of those collaborations is getting to see another top-notch group work. How do they interact with one another? How do they handle travel? How do they handle programming? How do they handle disputes? And then what is it like? I'm used to having to match pitch with Andrew, but what is it like for me to match pitch with Monica, who's playing bassoon, and how are we going to resolve issues in terms of time? Or it's like all the stuff you knew kind of goes out the window. It doesn't go out the window, but it gets informed in a different way.
Yeah.
And what do you do about the balance? And so obviously that was the elephant in the room when we collaborated with the Tang. Was the notion that there's 5 brass players going to play with 4 string players. And so actually I remember going out and the first time I was on the mic talking about the fact, I know a lot of you are concerned about the balance issues between the brass quintet and the string quartet, but we've had very, very long conversations with the Tang, and they've agreed to tone it down a little bit. So
that's a good line.
And they were amplified. I mean, that's the simple solution. The answer is that anymore you can amplify a group in a way that doesn't sound that does sound organic, that does maintain the integrity of the quintet or the quartet. And so but we never had to worry about that before. That was not an issue that we had to deal with. So it also, I think it pushed us in lots of cool, creative ways. So there's that.
Speaking of string quartets, we should thank Parker Mouthpieces for providing the hosting for the Brass Junkies. Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable mouthpieces and string mutes for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz Artist Model tuba mouthpiece and the Lance LaDuke Model violin mute, or euphonium mouthpiece too. You can find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All right, let's knock a few more of these out before we hit the 90-minute mark on part 2. So quickly, how do you find gigs? Carefully.
It's a good question, and it goes to.
Thanks, man.
You did it well. You read it off the page perfectly.
I've been exposed.
At the beginning, you're probably just doing gigs, right? You're probably just doing, this graduation ceremony, that church thing, the somebody's wedding, any kind of gig that you can get. How many commencements did you play in your day? It's like
a few.
Oh, when I was in the Air Force Band, the group that I was in, nothing but valves. We were, all May and June was
trombone quartet.
Well, the guy that put the group together hated trombone players, so it was 2 trumpets, horn, euphonium. But we just cleaned up every spring. It was like right. Easter through June, we were booked because it was like Easter gigs and then these commencement gigs. So how do you get them? By any means necessary. And it depends on the kind of group that you want to be. So if you want to be a gigging group, then it's a lot of the normal things. I don't mean to blow past these quickly, but it is much more straightforward. You can find the wedding planners, are there wedding conventions in the area, go hit up all of the church organists, go, beat the bushes. Do you know people who are active in this church or that church or the whatever church? Any school that that may, like a college that may not have a music program, offer yourself up to do ceremonial music for them. It can be the openings of whatever. It could be their commencements. It can be any sort of special occasion. Are there local bookers that you can sort of get on their radar and sort of offer up your services? That's pretty straightforward, frankly. I mean, it's simple, which is not to indicate that it's easy, but it's the stuff that is existing work. And then if there are concert series in the area, well, then you go to the concert series, see what's on there, see who's running the show, and talk to them.
That's important. Yeah, for the love of all things holy, write individual emails that are written to the specific person, to the specific series. You have to do that. Sending an email is so easy. Where I live here, the traffic lights are long. They're just like the red lights are. They can be like 3 minutes long. I can literally send an email while I am sitting through one cycle of a traffic light. I can send a quick email because of my phone and technology now. Sending an email takes nothing. So the fact that you can send out a blast, I complain about this all the time on TEM. I get pitched a lot by PR professionals. In fact, there was the end of the winter, I had a TEM episode about beware of PR firms, because the 9 out of 10 pitches I get from PR firms are terrible. Like I come up in a Google search pretty much near the top. Not at the top, but the top-ish for Music Business Podcast. So they see it, and the email boils down to, hi, my client, or but my client has, it would be good for them if they could get on your podcast so they could talk about the thing that they are just putting out. So please get back to them. And they mention nothing about TEM. It's clear that they've never listened to an episode. They don't know who my audience is. Like, you can take 5 minutes and look, literally 5 minutes, not as a figure of speech, and look at the show notes for just a handful of my episodes. You can see who I've had as guests and see if it's someone like that, or if we just had somebody who does exactly what you did, then now is not the time to pitch you. It's like you should wait a few months. It's amazing how much, if you just pay attention to, I've been pitched before to have someone to host a guest spot on TEM, which has never happened in well over 150 episodes. So why the hell would I have you do it if I've never heard of you? That's just somebody who's reaching out to 50 people and just cutting and pasting and seeing what sticks. But I don't even respond to those emails. So the good news is that everybody does this. Just about everybody does this poorly. So if you do just a little bit of legwork and you figure out exactly what a concert series is about, and figure out everyone they've had in the last 5 years, and say, I saw that you had the Dallas Brass in 2014, and whatever, and say I do something very similar, and yet but my own spin on it. And if they have brass every 5 years and they just had brass last year, then maybe just set an alarm to reach out to them in a year and a half, kind of thing, because they're going to say no right now. Just be thoughtful about it. There's no actual rules about it. Just be thoughtful, and remember that if you solve a problem for the person you're pitching, then they're going to be happy that you bothered them. It's the 51-49 rule. If they get 51% of the gain out of it, whereas the people who pitch me for their clients, or people who pitch themselves just for themselves, that's not solving a problem for me. Mm-hmm. So, just the great news is so many people do that badly that you can stand out immediately by just being thoughtful with your communications and with your emails. Yeah.
What value do you provide?
Yes.
And as Ariel Hyatt is she's cyber PR and cyber PR for musicians, and I'm in the middle of my marketing and communications class right now, and we're starting to talk about social media, which the connection there is that a lot of times the social media, the plan on social media is, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. Like every post is just like, buy my stuff, check out my stuff, come to my con, la, 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 la. And her position, which I firmly believe with, taps in nicely to what Andrew was just talking about, which is to provide value to your audience and do that 90% of the time. Yep. And so then your estimation in the eyes of that person, if you go to that concert presenter and you say, hey, I play with this local brass group. I noticed that you have a lot of string groups. I just heard this fantastic string quartet. I don't know if they're on your radar, but you got to get them. They were fantastic.
Yep.
Oh, by the way, if you ever need brass, let me know. And then you see them again. You come to their shows. You talk to them. You see what else they have going on. Oh, my gosh. Have you heard Roomful of Teeth? I know you don't book vocal stuff that much, but they're awesome. So then they see you as sort of a tastemaker, colleague, ally. And then when it's time in their minds, I need brass. Who should I? Oh, you know what? This person has brought me great like 7 or 8 fantastic leads. Well, I'm going to at least call them to figure out what they have going on. Is there a fit for this thing? And so it's much more about relationship building and providing value outwardly.
Yes.
Because then it just naturally comes back to you. It's a longer game. It's scary when, it's like, okay, there's no work in May. What am I going to do?
Right.
It's a different problem. But that's... Go.
No, sorry. You can also have sorry to cut you off. You can have a link in your email signature, which, by the way, I should not have to scroll even a little bit to get to the bottom of your email signature. If you've got if you've cut and pasted an entire newspaper review and there's like embedded YouTube links and videos, no, don't do that. No one's ever going to watch that ever. But yeah, if just at the bottom it says blah 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 brass at the bottom of that email that says, oh, I went to your show, that was incredible, and oh, by the way, reminds me Roomful of Teeth is great, then they may very well click on that, and at that point they're asking. That's like somebody walks up to you at the dinner party and says, please talk to me about what you do. That's not you cornering someone by the cheese dip and being like, let me tell you about my brass group that you need to hire because I want to be able to buy my own cheese dip. Yeah, very, very, very different. So,
but enough about me. Why don't you talk about me?
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk very quickly about management. Management is... I think it's very important to note that I think a lot of us assume, whether we're actually brought up this way or it's just an assumption that I think we all make, that management is the holy grail, right? Like you've really arrived when you get management, and then management gets you gigs, and then you live indoors and eat food, and you have disposable income, and you take your kids to Disney, or you can go to Paris on vacation with your boyfriend or whatever. That is true and not at all true. Management is never going to care as much. No one is ever going to care as much about your group as you do, like, period. That's not even a criticism. It really isn't. You just have to keep in mind that management is amazing at taking 20% of the money that you bring in. Like, they're really good at. They can do that literally in their sleep. But a lot of times, if you don't get the right management, then if your fee is $3,000, and then they have another group on their roster whose fee is $9,000, guess which group they're going to recommend for that concert series? Their take will literally be 3 times as much for the $9,000. And there are going to be some that you fit and others that they fit, but if you both fit, they're going to push that other one every single time. And also, if you don't get management that really understands what you're trying to do and is willing to work with you and have a back and forth, then they will start to try and sell to people what they think the other person really wants, and they may then try and convince you to do things other than what you actually are setting out to do, and then that can create friction. But then also you show up at a gig and you're playing stuff that, and you're a new music group, and then they're asking you to play late Beethoven quartets, then not that you can't do it, but you're not going to do it as well as a group that hangs out there all the time. And so you really have to find someone who is an ally, who's great at their work, who's an ally both financially from a business standpoint, but also artistically, and is like a champion of what you actually do. And those people are out there. And I don't think the people that don't check both those boxes, I don't want to make it sound like I think that they're hucksters or that they're trying to steal from anybody or anything like that. I just think that your average management is not great at management. It's just like your run-of-the-mill brass quintet. They're fine. They're fine at it, but they're not great. So don't assume that because somebody has a roster that they're going to be good in general, or that they're going to be good for you.
Yeah, I wonder. It had been the case that you wanted to have management because it made you look legit, and then you wanted to have management that was in New York because that was an additional box that was checked in terms of looking legit. And I wonder how much that holds anymore. I'm wondering how much of it is. There's definite, negotiation of contracts and getting doors opened that you might not be able to get on your own are definite. Those are real things, but I don't know. Are we at the point where that matters less and less?
That's and now if you get management that has a lot of first-hand connections with people in the space that you are looking to succeed in, that's one thing. But if they're going to be cold calling people because they don't have the connections where you want to hang out, that's an important thing to get done, and it also can be done spectacularly badly or really great or somewhere in between. So I'm not just saying that that's just you cold call, they cold call, whatever. But as with anything, you have to figure out, what is this worth? If your group is bringing in $100,000 in revenue for the calendar year, is it worth $20,000 of those dollars for them to do that? Or is that something that you could outsource to somebody else for $5,000? If the connections are not there, and are you going to pitch that email better than they are? And I'm not saying that you will. I'm not saying that you can for 5 rather than 20, but you have to. Everything has to be with a price, right? The Tang Quartet was a great idea. If the Tang Quartet was telling us that they needed 90% of the fee, then we would not have been able to charge enough to be able to get us even remotely close to what we would need to justify that. Just all of the human power that went into getting all of that straight, and all of that time you spent with the pro, et cetera. Here's
a question for you.
Yes.
So you could spend the group, in your example, your group, we could give 20% to management, or we can take $20,000 and we can do X with it. What would you do with the $20,000 in that year?
It depends on what we have and what we don't have. I try to make this point regularly on TEM, but all of the marketing and the networking and all of that in the world doesn't amount to anything if the art that you're making is not remarkable, which the definition of is worth remarking about. And so if I might use some of that. It depends on what space you hang out in. Could you use that for some commissions that would get you, if that's the world you hang out in, maybe a big name commission, is targeted Facebook ads in terms of whatever your goal metric is. But it's amazing how you can target that kind of stuff. To pay a photographer for a kick-ass photo shoot is, and not that you can't have a kick-ass photo shoot and have management, but your question was one or the other. Having someone build you a website that looks really, really sharp, getting bare bones recording, and maybe hiring a videographer such that you can have actual footage of you in a concert, even if you put on that concert for free, which you don't flash at the top of the screen, but that there's video of you doing your thing in front of a studio, live studio audience. I don't know where that came from, in front of an audience. So the videographer, the photographer, having a website that looks slick, paying to be able to promote all of that stuff. If you do all of that right, and by the way, you don't figure out how to become a great video person. You hire somebody to do that. Unless you got somebody in-house, then good. Or if you can profit share with somebody because you're really close with them and they're great. But if the question is either you pay management all that money or you can put this into all this other stuff, then I would put it into all that other stuff.
Yeah. Buy 5, let's say you're a quintet, buy 5 plane tickets and go to X and show up, or go sequester yourself and pay everybody's expenses for 5 days to do a boot camp.
Yes, that's big. That's big because there's a lot of groups that don't have the financial ability when they're first getting started to not only pay their way to get somewhere and then to hole up, but also to not have any income for those 5 days as well. And so if the group can just kind of make that go away, and you're still not making any money, but yeah, that's so important. Yeah, because the art has to be. The problem is that if you're an up and coming brass quintet and you got to compete with Boston Brass on the artistic level, who are on the road 4, 5, 6 months a year, they play with each other all the damn time. So it's a lot easier to do that. Close your eyes and breathe and come in together when you're on the road for 6 months a year than when you're just getting started. There's a lot of ways that you can spend that money.
One of the ways Amani spent some of the money they agreed was they bought Monica, who did all the booking. They bought her the airport lounge, like there's a lounge pass that you can basically get into any of the airport lounges, and you can usually bring in one person. So they would rotate who the other person would go in, and then she had free Wi-Fi wherever she was. She had a quiet place to do business, and it was just like it was a no-brainer in terms of them seeing this as a valuable resource.
That's really smart.
I thought so too. Yeah,
that's really smart, and an outlet, and all of the above. And now it's a hell of a lot easier to get a hotspot and all that stuff. But that's smart. So just here's what I would beg you to do: is don't just go the path that, like, it's, yes, you should put your recording out on a record label. It's like, well, okay, what are the terms? Like what? Yeah, and not that you're necessarily going to make any money ever, but in general, the well-known labels at this point, especially if you're up and coming, they're not paying for your recording. So you're going to pay for the recording, and then they own it. And then you get to buy. Yeah, I mean, it's like, wait, what?
It's totally backwards. Yeah.
It is totally backwards. And not that there's no value in being on a label that has other people, but like, how much is that really going to move the needle?
Right.
And you just kind of, you just do the math. And then, like, you can't necessarily do whatever you want with that music. So you've then got to figure out exactly how you want to be handling that. Don't just get management because that's what you're supposed to do.
Actually, if I had the 20 grand, another thing I might do is I might take some of it and buy a kickin' portable recording rig, and then we just record every concert that we do. And when we have enough usable stuff, then we put it out as it's ready. Or I might pay for a roadie. I might pay for somebody to deal with all the horse manure that goes on, so then I can spend more time booking gigs, getting better, doing that other stuff. There's lots and lots of ways to spend that money.
And
not
the
that
roadie,
you shouldn't spend it on management, but there's lots of other ways.
I just don't put that part on autopilot. So, and again, not in a disingenuous way, but of course, people that are in management think you should have management. I mean, they went into it for a career. Like, I would hope they would like advocate strongly for their profession. But the point is, like, at what cost? Everything has a cost, and just because you like a euphonium and it plays really well, if it costs $28,000, then, like, how does it really play, like, 7 times better than a tuba or than a euphonium that costs 1/7 of that? And if the answer is yes, then great, like, knock yourself out. But that's important. I think there's a simple way to answer the question of how do you get gigs. Like, if I wanted to so we have this goofy thing that's happened one time so far, which is Lance LaDuke and the New Malcontents, which was you and me and this drummer. So if I wanted to get gigs for that thing, I would call in every favor where we are. I would get as good as we could get, and then I would go hit up Allied concert tours, and I would hit up live on stage and try and get a showcase for those two things. And so if you can land either or both of those, then you're going to get a crap ton of work, which means you're going to get a whole bunch better. And when you're on the road, then you're hitting up every music teacher, band director, whatever, to land more gigs. And then you just collect business cards the whole time that you're out, and then you work the phone when you get home. And then you rinse, repeat. Lather, rinse, repeat, and you just keep doing that. And then you look at, where are there some conferences that we could go to? And when you're at the music educator conference, then you're going to get a booth, and it'll cost you whatever it costs, and you work the room and you collect the business cards and you go back. I mean, it's not magic. It's not like this super cool whiz bang Hogwarts spell. You just got to go hustle it out. There's good news. There's a much larger number of people who think they are up for doing that amount of work over a prolonged period of time than there actually are people who are willing to do that amount of work over a prolonged period of time, which is really good news for anybody trying to go down this path. Because if it was easy, then all of us who have succeeded, and I did, like, I joked that in the last episode that I just suggested that people get a gig while they're still in graduate school with an already formed quintet that's already touring the country. And that's exactly so. I want to be clear. I've never built a group up. Like, I did not do that legwork. I happened to hit the lottery in terms of timing, but I have done the legwork on a lot of other things, like podcasts that had literally 0 listeners when they first aired, and then maybe had like 20 when they aired the 3rd episode, and that now have thousands of listeners. So it's like you have to do the work. You have to keep showing up, and that's the key. So
yeah.
That's actually really, really good news. So, well, I think that we are out of time here, Lance. Are there any parting words of wisdom that you would have for anyone who still is making a go of this? Actually, I have one parting piece of wisdom. Well, just to reiterate the very first point that we made in part 1 of this, which is that when someone asks Lance or I says they're going to form a brass quintet, and it's 2 trumpets, French horn, trombone, tuba. Sorry, I know it's now horn. Don't email me. Horn and French trombone and tuba. Then what is our advice? The first thing that you say is,
why would you want to do
why? And that's not because we who have come before you have done everything artistically worthy that's worth doing. We've already done it. No, it's just it's better to be first. It's better to be first in your own category. Again, think Amelia Earhart. If that's your passion and you have the horses already in mind to do that, then go gangbusters. But maybe think a little bit more creatively at first, because if you've got 3 brass players and a vocalist, that's a hell of a lot more interesting to me than a
it's back to the producers versus consumers.
Yes.
Like, if you're passionate about playing the Arnold and the Etler, okay, that's fine. But in what way is this going to be? How can you make could you have a projection and you commissioned filmmakers so that there's going to be some visual component to this thing? So how can you go into the producer realm and not be just a recreator of music, but a creator of music?
Yes. Yep. Well, Izzy is barking. I think Izzy is telling me that it's time to go pick my kid up.
Hold one thing. I want to thank the listeners, because I think I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but when it does, I'm confident that we will have surpassed 150,000 listens, which is a crazy big number for a couple of dipwads and microphones. So thank you very much to anybody and everybody who's listened to this, shared it with a friend, hit us up and talk to us about it. We don't often talk about big milestones like that, but that's a pretty big one. And thank you.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for caring. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you to Becky for emailing. All of you who have taken the time to do that. We really, really do appreciate it very much. Just your support means the world. So, all right. I think that is going to do it for another episode of the Brass Junkies. You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to hear the bonus episode featuring today's guest, please visit patreon.com/thebrassjunkies to learn how you can support the show and instantly access all bonus materials, as well as gain access to a special patron-only Facebook group. The Brass Junkies is produced by the amazing, wonderful, and truly inspirational Will Houchin. The theme music was composed by Fernando Dados and performed by Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. We are at Pray for Jens on Twitter and Instagram and have a Facebook page at facebook.com/prayforjens. You can find out more about the Brass Junkies and all the other Pedal Note Media podcasts at pedalnotemedia.com. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.